This is a mom from California who has done program with all four of her children at one point or another. And could we have you talk to us about what started your concerns?
Well, my third child is an African American male boy, and all four of my children are adopted, and so they all had different birth scenarios and so on. But we knew that he had had significant cocaine. But by the time he was getting up to a year and 18 months, he was becoming quite a handful. And I initially just assumed that it was, my first boy, and he was more rambunctious and so on. But as soon as he became more and more mobile, his issues became more and more distinct. And by the time he was 2 and 3, he was really challenging to deal with. He would go from one very difficult stage, and I think, oh, he's outgrown it, and then he'd move into another very difficult stage from eating everything that he could find to put in his mouth. And then as soon as he was more mobile, then it was began pushing and biting and screaming and tantruming. And by the time he was 5 years old, well, I had tried to put him in special, nursery classes and educational classes, and I would just hand pick the right classes that would help him to have the most success possible. But he was very difficult to be around. None of the kids liked to be around him because he would scream at them and push them over and grab their toys. And while many little boys might behave that way, it was excessive for him. He was always the one who was hitting the child, always the one who was stealing their toy and screaming in their face, and until nobody wanted to be around him. And as a mother, I just became very obsessive. We went to the park. I watched him like a hawk, because otherwise he was hurting other people's kids, and it was very challenging to live with at home. By the time he was 4 or 5 years old, my memory is that he would scream this blood-curdling, high-pitched, brain-rattling scream, and as he grew older, he began having more and more tantrum rages, until it was at the point where we took everything out of his bedroom but his bed and his bedding and his dresser. And there was nothing on the wall, there were no toys, there were no books, there was nothing in his bedroom, because it became a missile across the room as he would have these rages, and we would just have to put him in his room for a timeout when he'd have these rages, and it was just really trying. And then besides the tantruming, as we're trying to manage his behavior, he would be put on 2 or 3 minute timeouts 20, 30 times a day. So this poor little boy was in and out of his room all day long, and I was trying my best to be a positive mom and not always to be negative. I was trying to ignore bad behavior and reward positive behavior and give appropriate consequences, and it was just getting worse. And so finally it came time for him to go to kindergarten, and while I had nursed, and I was not acknowledging how bad it really was until when he began kindergarten in the public school. And within very short time, it was very clear that he was really having a lot of troubles. He wasn't making it. While a lot of people would comment what a bright kid he was, I could tell that there was just gaps in his ability to take in information appropriately. I mean, while he could talk up a string in certain ways, he couldn't remember half of his alphabet. He couldn't remember his numbers. He couldn't stay on task long enough to be taught things. It was just really frustrating. I didn't know what to do. But I was aware of Donna Bateman, and at about the same time, my other child was also diagnosed with autism, and I realized I am in over my head. I have some boys with some serious brain issue, and I knew that in my interactions with Donna that she had had some success, and I wanted to have success. And so I contacted her and I said, I've got 2 boys with some brain issues, and she arranged to come and assess them and get them on a program. And that's been a little over 4 years ago now. And we began the program. When she first assessed my little son, his assessment grade, was about 55, which was pretty severe brain injury or brain status level. And so we began the program, which involved a lot of creeping and crawling, involved a lot of sensory. When he had him tested for sensory, I discovered that on his face and his chest and his hands, he was very hypersensitive. If we did a soft brush or something on his hand, it was like, oh, 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 oh. But if you went down the back of his head, down his back, or his calves, or his feet, almost no sensation at all. You could just rake a brush across it and no flinching, no response whatsoever. So there was clearly there was chaos happening in terms of sensory that was coming into his body through his skin, through his sense of touch. And when we tested his vision, he had very difficult with tracking, and he could not locate sound anywhere. Sound, there were sometimes when he would be covering his ears. He was the only kid in church on Sunday with his hands over his ears, not because the choir sounded bad, but because the volume was just way too much for him and they weren't singing that loudly. And he would be the only kid at the school party who is hiding in the kitchen under the counter because the music in the gym is too loud. And yet in the car, we'd be playing music on the radio and it would be loud for everybody else and he wants it turned up, he can't hear it. And so some things were too loud, some things were too soft, and it was just, he was getting chaotic information through his hearing. And with his vision, so his eyes, he couldn't track, they were bumping all over, he didn't have a good conversion of his vision, so who knows, no wonder he was having trouble with his letters. Who knows how well could he even see them, although he had passed seeing tests with his doctor and 20/20 vision according to them, but when it came to actually being able to see something at this distance, that was never tested, and we clearly saw that there were issues. So basically we began to realize that with smell, some things that should smell terrible didn't bug him at all, and other things that shouldn't smell so bad, it's like, what's that smell? Ooh, that's weird. So almost every sensory organ of his body was bringing in chaotic information, and chaos is what we saw coming out. And so we began the program, and we began having to have him crawl, which he of course did not like. He was about 5 years old then, and I would have to follow right along beside him. And I tried to make it fun. We tried to have him chase a ball, and we tried to have him, go behind him with things. But as soon as I would do that, he couldn't stay organized to stay crawling, and he would be leaping all over the place and getting up, going all different directions, and so I finally just had to follow right along behind him and come on, this is what we're going to do, and it was challenging because he didn't want to do that. He would rather be out playing and run around screaming and so on. But I knew something had to go, something had to be different to help this little boy, or his life was headed for a shipwreck because he could not function in society. And so I was determined, and it was not easy to go every day facing that. We begin in the morning and I'd crawl. It took us about 2 hours to do the crawling. Eventually we worked up to that. We didn't start that length, but it took us about 2 hours to crawl and to creep on his tummy. I would get it backwards, creeping and crawling, but anyway. And there were times when I'd follow along behind him with a little stick and tap him on his bum if he would. And so he eventually learned that this was his job. He needed to do this every day. And then we would do other sensory things where he had to locate sound, and I did my best to do that, several times a day. And smells, different smells we had to do. We just had a lot of things that we did that were working with him that were helping to retrain his brain. And I began seeing little things as we were doing it. We began the program in November, the very first part of November. And we'd gone to a wedding in the middle of October, and he had a cousin, and these two cousins, same age, loved each other and wanted to be together, but in this 3 days a weekend that they were together, oh my golly, these boys, they would play and fight from sentence to sentence. And by the end of the weekend, we were all going crazy by these two kids. Well, I began the program in November, and then we got together again for Thanksgiving. And we were together for 3 days again with the same cousin, and they only fought 3 times in the whole weekend. And his mother and I both looked at it and said, wow, something has changed, because that's not the same situation that was just a month ago. And all we could think of was that we had begun this program. We had begun the creeping and crawling and the sensory and all this stuff, and it was beginning to make a difference. And then I noticed it at Christmas time, so it'll be a month and a half later, hung up the Christmas stockings. And I knew he was struggling with, letters and reading in kindergarten. And I hung up the Christmas stockings, and he said, Mom, which one is your stocking? And I said, well, my stocking says Mom on it, M-O-M. Go find it. See if you can find which one is mine. And so he went and he looked for a few minutes, and I can't find it. I don't know which one it is. And so I said, okay, well, I can show him. See, this is it, M-O-M, Mom. This is my stocking. M-O-M, M-O-M, okay. And he thought that was good. Well, then about a week later, he came to me again, and he said, Mom, which stocking is your stocking? And I said, mine says M-O-M on it. You go find it. And he went in there, and he came back carrying my stocking. M-O-M, here it is, Mom, I found it. And I went, wow, that's the first time that he has had that much retention of the letters to remember. So I was impressed by that. And then the next day, he was sitting at the table scribbling, and then all of a sudden I saw him writing M-O-M. And I just jaw dropped. Wow, this is new behavior. Things have not been sticking, especially letters, in his brain. This was the first time. And so all I could say is that things are starting to happen. Things are starting to work. So we continued through that school year. He made significant improvement, but still had some challenges through that year. And then we went ahead and repeated kindergarten. He did far better the second year of kindergarten. And long story short, he's now in the 3rd grade. And I should back up a little bit. Also in school, the challenge was his social. Nobody liked to be around him. In kindergarten, kids would see him coming toward him, and they would scatter. Oh, here comes, and they'd call his name, and we don't want to be around him, and whoop, they go and hide, and they'd scatter. And he liked to be around kids. He was kind of a social kid by nature. He wanted to be around people. It frustrated him that nobody wanted to be around him, but he didn't know how to manage himself so that anybody wanted to be around him. And so now, fast forward, he's now in the 3rd grade, and he is at least in the middle of the pack, if not in the upper levels of his class in reading, writing, and math. He has lots of friends. They now invite him over to their homes, and the parents, when I come pick him up, they say, oh, he was just a delight. He was just the sweetest, most polite little guy. And I just think, wow, this is not the same kid that we had just 4 years ago. And we're not done yet. His last score was 89. So we went from 55 to 89. So there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. And he is, just doing so much better. Just today, when I went to go out to the car to bring in some groceries, and he said, Mom, where are you going? I said, oh, I'm going to go bring in groceries. And he said, oh, can I come help you? I said, sure, come on. That's new behavior, even within the last 6 months, where he notices that there's a need and he jumps in and just helps without me prodding him and asking him to do. So for him and my family, this program has been life-changing. Has it been easy? No. Has it been a day-to-day struggle? Not that it's rocket science to understand how to do it, but yes, it's been a struggle to every day just get up and try again. My new favorite quote says, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's that quiet voice that says, I'll try again tomorrow. And that's what we just keep doing. And someday, and it's not too far away now, he's already flying and beginning to fly solo, and I have every reason to believe that he is going to be a successful young man and be able to be appropriate in society, be able to academically be successful, to be socially graceful, to be emotionally stable and secure. And